Welcome to the Teach Better Talk podcast, your official podcast for the Teach Better Podcast Network, the hub for all things education, brought to you by teachbetter.com. The Teach Better Talk podcast is committed to answering your burning questions through a variety of lenses and bringing new offers to you and your colleagues to help you thrive throughout the school year. My name is Ray Hewart, and we love your questions here on the pod. If you have any questions that you'd love us to consider as topics for future episodes, please share them with us by emailing info@teachbetter.com.
Our topic this week continues to celebrate literacy. We've talked a lot about media literacy, and we are continuing this conversation with those driving questions that you all have submitted around this topic. We have a brand new perspective on today's conversation, hopefully a familiar face. But before we dive too far in, I do want to give a massive shout out to Carrie. She is our director on our blog department. She is somebody that deals with the written language and putting it up on the media for you all to hear on a continual basis. If you head over to teachbetter.com/blog, you can read blogs from the Teach Better team and our surrounding community every single day. And I love that Carrie is able to take our guest bloggers' work, edit them, put some fancy, graphics, and get that out to the world. So huge shout out to Carrie. Another person that we are so excited to see is, of course, our incredible guest, Pam Allyn. Pam, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great. I love to be back with you. You guys are awesome. What a great community. And I'm here in New York City looking out at the skyline. It's a super hot day, and everything's good. I can't complain.
I love it. Pam, we were able to feature you at the tail end of our show last season. I want to say it was the month of May, and I know our community was just obsessed with that episode. We had such rich conversation. We had to feature you again, and it had to be as soon as possible. So I'm glad we fit you in August right away, because our community was so eager to hear more about you. Before we dive too far into all the fun questions that I have planned for us, do you mind sharing a bit about who you are, what you do, kind of all that fun?
Definitely. Absolutely. Well, and again, I also just love talking to you, so I'm happy to be back as well. So my name is Pam Allyn, and I'm a founder and creator and author, and I've made a lot of things that kids really seem to like, and I just keep doing that because I really love it. I always think of myself as somebody who I love being in the imaginative universes of children and young adults, and I have so much of the privilege of getting to do that with so many kids around the country and around the world. So I've created several different things, some of which are programs that are used by school districts, summer school programs, literacy programs, core programs that I've worked on with publishers, many different publishers, Penguin, Pearson, Scholastic, and then others I've created myself, and including an initiative called Lit World that created World Read Aloud Day that is celebrated on the first Wednesday of every February. So I think I mentioned last time, but hoping your community will celebrate with us this year. And then finally, last but I hope never least, is I've built a new organization called Dewey, which is basically an incubator for creating great ideas for teachers. So any teachers listening today, if you have thoughts and ideas, come visit us there at Dewey Community. And we're building something right now that's new, that's all about young children and reading and writing. So you'll see that all pretty soon. But as of right now, I'm just always very interested in, what are teachers thinking about? What would make your jobs easier? Everything I've written, I'm always thinking about that. You have so much on your plate. You want a lesson that's just going to work, and so that's my mission.
Pam, anything that you endorse and put your name on, I am a huge advocate for. So I can only imagine that these programs that you have designed and curated perfectly for educators is going to be something that our community will go jump onto. Friends, this is also a great spot that if you might be interested in looking into that community, bring a colleague, bring a friend, right? We all are involved in this work, and this is a great space to be able to look into. Pam, every time we talk about World Read Aloud Day, I am baffled. I can't believe that's something that hasn't existed for the entire, didn't we come as humans onto the planet and World Read Aloud Day existed? Because I can't believe,
yes.
Unbelievable that you were a part of this movement, because I just assumed as not only a child, but also as an educator, that has always been something that people have celebrated. What is
That's
it
the sign of a great idea. No, I mean, I always think that like the best ideas are the ideas that children really understand and that you can tap back into your childhood and say, now that would be really fun to do that. And I think World Read Aloud Day really exemplifies that. I feel like the thing that's so amazing about it is that people take it and they run with it. So like, everybody listening here too, to think, is there an idea, a creative idea that you have that would go really well with that day? We have plenty of time to plan in advance, and you and I will be talking in the meantime, and I'm sure there's lots of things we can do. The great thing about the Read Aloud is like, it just perseveres. It's like every other thing can be invented and innovated and come along, and the Apple Watch will soon be, who knows, the Apple dishwasher, we don't know. But like the Read Aloud is just true blue. It never fails us. It's like, I have a 2-year-old grandson, and yesterday we were reading The Napping House by Audrey and Don Wood, and that's just a classic. It's an amazing book. I never fail to find that book amazing. And he looked at it, and then after he turned to me and he said, I like this book. And it was the first time he had like an opinion. Like you can see which books he wants to read again, but it was like the first time he had an opinion where he said, I like this book. And I was like, I almost passed out. I was like telling everyone, I said, oh my God, he said he likes a book, but that's the Read Aloud. He's only 2. That's amazing. So it's a magical miracle of a thing. And what's great about World Read Aloud Day is I can see that all over the world, people celebrate in their own languages, in their own ways, with their own books. If they don't have a lot of books, they write their own stories and share them. It's an amazing holiday. It really is.
I cannot believe that this is something that at some point in time didn't exist, and I'm thrilled that this year we can make it intentional. I will admit, sometimes some of these really special moments of celebration get away from me. So friends, this is your reminder. I know you're listening on either Teach Better Talk podcast or you're watching on YouTube. Like, pull open your phone. You don't have to pause the pod, and throw it in your calendar. And I'm somebody who would throw it in my calendar on the day of, but then also like 2 weeks before for my reminder to be like, don't forget, do something special on this day. It doesn't matter what teacher you are, at what grade level, and what community, anywhere around the world. This is such a special opportunity. And now you can say that you connected with Pam, who is a part of the creation of this day. I am just still blown away that I get to talk to you, and this was something that you crafted up. I have to tell you, Pam, so many times when I hear you speak, and I've been fortunate enough to learn from you, you are always somebody that is high energy. You're very passionate. You have incredible stories. I love hearing you speak. How do you stay motivated in this space? This clearly isn't your first rodeo. You didn't enter into this space last weekend just for fun.
Yeah, no, that's such a great question. I first of all, I just feel like, I definitely very much love children. I feel like they really genuinely inspire me. And I think also for myself, I have a very vivid memories of my childhood and what things really impacted me, the people, my Aunt Evie, my parents, obviously my grandparents, people who really touched me in a way that was very profound. And I'm always kind of tapping back into that. Like, what did my grandmother do for me? I want to do that for people. And the other thing, though, is just on like kind of a daily basis is I'm very lucky and fortunate that I found ways to tap into young teachers, young professionals who I like really invite to work with me. Not that you have to be young to do that, but I always want to remember what it felt like to be at the beginning of things, even as I grow older. And I very much love my wise peers in my work, absolutely. But there's something very exciting about, for example, we always have interns at Dewey. Like we always bring college students in, and even high school students have come and worked with me over many summers. There's something about just the newness to the workplace, and they're not, they haven't been already taught. If you don't do that in public education, like they'll say to me, well, what about that? Why can't we do that? And so I do feel like that nourishes me. Like people who aren't going to say, oh, I already found out that we can't do that for 20 years. I love to be with people who will say, and for me too, at the other end of the spectrum is I do have my friend, for example, Dr. Shirley Smith, who's an elder, and we just had her over last week for lunch, and she's still out there helping me advocate for the work. She meets with districts and talks to them. She's or I think she's now already turned 90. So at the other end of the age span, I'm looking for my elders to say, after all these years, like what's still inspiring you? So I think I'm always in a community. I'm always asking questions. My dad always said, the most confident people ask a lot of questions. And I'm always curious, I'm curious to know what is motivating Gus at the age of 2? What's motivating Dr. Shirley at the age of 90? What's motivating my young colleague at the age of 18 who isn't sure what they want to do with their career? Do they want to be a teacher? They don't know yet. But they're so close to their own education. I think that really keeps me very excited about what we can still create.
The concept of motivation is really relevant right now, right? We're at the tail end of August. So many educators are either back in full swing or they're right before it's about to kick off. And I feel like, Pam, I know you know this feeling. You've been in so many schools, had so many life experiences. The feeling of a new school year, it rushes through your blood. I mean, you can feel the energy, the exhaustion, the excitement, the decision-making that comes back that teachers have that skill to do. And I wonder if this is a good time. I know this isn't our topic today, but I wonder if this is a good time to give our community some perspective on how to use this beginning of the school, new energy, new faces, new colleagues, new students, to learn about the motivation of others, so that almost like collecting tools in a toolbox, so that later on in the year, when maybe the energy is a little lower, maybe the excitement has diminished a little, we're able to look back and say, okay, I learned a lot about my colleague Pam and what motivates her, so that when I need to pull that out and motivate in a new way, I know where to begin. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, first of all, it's a great question. And secondly, I actually think I would tap back into the question you asked me, which is the question of, what motivates you, what keeps you going, to actually turn that question around. And for teachers listening and thinking about getting back into the school year before we know it, is for us to ask our children and our teenagers, whatever age group we're teaching, to ask them that question. Like, what motivates and inspires you in your learning is such a beautiful question to ask your students, because the surprises are abundant. What inspires me is, a child might say, my grandma inspires me every day. Or another child might say, the flower my mom put out on the kitchen table today. Or another child might say, what inspires me is I love to solve a math problem, and letting those words of their own wisdom, putting those up on our walls, making those into quotes, so my grandmother inspires me every day becomes a quote on the wall, by Pablo. That's like beautiful. And then too, I think the same is true for faculty meetings. Is I notice in faculty meetings at the beginning of the school year, where there's so much to think about. We've got to get our, all the ducks in order. We've got to do logistics. We've got to know how to do all the rituals and routines. But I also think in the faculty meetings, could we say, let's actually say that each and every time we meet, we're going to take some minutes to actually have motivational prompts for how we get to know each other more deeply. And one of them might be that actual question that you asked me, which is kind of a wonderful question, which is, what motivates you? What keeps you going? What keeps you connected to this work? Imagine if that's what we were asking on the first day of that faculty meeting back to school.
Yeah. And it's interesting, and I could be wrong here, so please challenge me on this, but there's almost 2 or 3 different questions we could look at depending on what perspective we're looking through. Not only what inspires you, because I actually can empathize with the grandma notion. My grandma tutored me my entire life. She had me diagnosed with a learning disability that really supported me long term. And oh my gosh, my grandma's like the coolest woman on the planet.
Yeah.
But then another question that I loved hearing you kind of share was almost focused on like what motivates me to learn. And I wonder if those are both valuable, but two different things to look at to get to know the people that you are serving.
I mean, I love that. I love the idea of what if we could put together like 5 motivation questions, like that
Yeah.
would be a kind of driving questions for us. One being, like you said, either memory or the person or people who influence us and make us feel strong. And then the second being, now what motivates you in learning itself? Like what motivates you as a learner? Having children, teenagers go around and describe what that is, and then recording those things, either actually recording them or even just documenting them so that they see them all around the room. And the same with our faculty and our colleagues. For me to ask someone, and I'm always curious, like in terms of thinking about my team at Dewey, like I can see, just by watching and observing them, that everybody is so different actually in what motivates them as learners. Like some might say, I have one colleague I think of off the top of my head, she loves a deadline. Like she likes me, like we're very much both of us, like we sort of thrive on that energy. Like give us a really meaty deadline, give us a project. We're like right there. But then I have another colleague who likes to have what motivates her in the learning is having a plan, sort of almost like looking out onto the horizon. Like by January, I want us to have done that. And I think in a way you're really getting at the heart of what are people's learning styles, and by asking our students those questions at the beginning of the year, you even might say to them, I'm going to keep asking you that question as the year unfolds, because you might find new ways to be motivated in your learning. And we want to know what those are. And another thing I'll say about motivation is something that somebody asked me this a long time ago. I never forgot it. And I always ask people also is what might get in the way of your motivation? What might get in the way? And then the third, so one is what motivates you in the learning. The second is what might get in your way. And then the third is what we as adults can do for our students, and even what you could do for your faculty colleagues. Is the third question is maybe the most important, and that is to say, and how could I be of help to you in removing that obstacle?
Yeah.
So if the child says what doesn't motivate or demotivates me, or it makes me feel like something's going to the thing that could get in my way is my fear of failure, or like I don't like a lot of noise, or I don't have enough time after school, then we know we can solve some of that. Like we could say, you know what, I'm going to help you with that. So I feel like you're almost like putting out on the table, so there's not as much guessing as you thought, because I actually think kids are incredibly self-aware. They're more than we think. They've tapped into themselves a lot.
I am so happy that we went down this road. This is such a perfect thing to remind us about as we are busy getting back in lesson planning and creating certain graphics to share out with families and getting our classrooms all set up. There are so many reminders here that are going to fill our toolbox with really important skills to serve our students, our colleagues, our staff members, and our leadership teams, everything in between.
And also, like thinking about that too, our families, the parents and grandparents and all the caregivers involved in that child's life, when we have our first back to school meeting or our first parent teacher conference, to ask them that too. What motivates you as a family, or what motivates you with your child? Like, when does homework feel good? When does homework feel hard? What do you notice feels intrinsically motivating for your child? And even if like the parents sort of laughs and said snacks, lean right into that. Like, I'm all for snacks. Like the snacks, huge motivator,
Yeah.
And it gives the parents, like, kind of makes them feel better. Like, you don't have to be, have a degree in education to be an amazing motivator for someone else. One thing I also wanted to say about motivation is I love, like, I get obsessed with different like themes. Speaking of themes on Instagram, like, so right now, I don't know if you guys what you think of this, but I'm really into rodeos, and I actually love watching. It's so weird. I just love horses, and I love like farm life. Like I've always wished I grew up on a farm and stuff like that. And so I've been watching all these people who do these rodeos, and there's this woman, I can't remember her name, but she wrote this leadership book that a lot of the young people that are involved with this passion have read. And she's like a 5-time world rodeo champion. And they're always quoting her. Like, she just is like, winning takes a lot of practice. She's got great little phrases. And I think that too for our kids, like bringing in other voices of people that aren't you, like yes to athletes, but also to artists, musicians, painters, people involved in like computer programming, people who are maybe a little bit like they have to be self-motivated because nobody's telling them what to do and when to do it. Entrepreneurs, bring those voices into the classroom.
Something I really want to emphasize, Pam, that goes so beautifully with what you've shared, but just to reiterate, you had a focus throughout this entire time of not just collecting information on people, but also choosing what of that information to display as a motivation. And I think whether it's quotes from students or motivational sentences we can build from their ideas, or these beautiful ideas, how social media can help us bring in other voices. I really love this reminder as well, because we are all finishing up our classroom, getting ready for students to be in a space that keeps them highly motivated. And this ties in beautifully to how literacy can allow us to keep students motivated in the classroom. How nice is it to be able to sit in class and not only see your work up on different displays, but also have it be in a way that it can remind you of what's important in your life. So, Pam, this has been an incredible conversation. I hate to stop it. This is why we always have so much fun. I never imagined I'd be talking about World Read Aloud Day and the rodeo in one session, but we are diving into literacy even further. So stick with us, friends. There's way more to come.
Quick pause to talk about the Teach Better Academy. Are you a member of the Teach Better Academy? For $9 a month, you can get access to over 40 courses that are specialized and designed for teacher leaders all across the US and Canada. These not only show you how to break down standards, bond with all of your students, design the best leadership plan, work with teachers with varying personality types, learn more about co-teaching, and anything in between. As you scroll through the Teach Better Academy, you'll see a number of courses that are all asynchronous for your learners and also give your teachers certified credit and badges for the work that they accomplish. Head over to teachbetter.com to learn more about the Academy or just to look at the courses, both free and full workshops, and go explore.
What are the risk factors as we dive into literacy? Throughout this week, we have dove into concepts like digital literacy, media literacy, and now we're continuing this conversation, but it might get a little spicy. Pam, something I always value about our conversation is not only your ideas, but your honesty. You are somebody who shares it how it is, and I always value your perspective. So I know there's a lot we can cover here. What comes to mind as maybe the first topic we can begin with in this idea of discussing literacy, both digital and media, and the risks that we are seeing happening within our students?
Well, I mean, I'll say, and I know I can say this to you, Ray, and your community, I am really, really worried about what's happening with our kids' exposure to as much media experiences as they're having. And then what does that idea of media literacy look like for them? Because when we think about the word literacy, we think about, at least I know what I think about is empowerment. It's like, I have agency over this. Like, this is not just me receiving something, but like I do something with it. Like, so the word literacy itself is literally defined as reading, writing, speaking, listening, and even viewing. So that's like, media is in that. And I think for me, the kind of challenge of my life maybe is, as somebody who's always said that I really want to expose kids to every possible opportunity they should have. So if it's, getting a way to see what's happening in the world through the lens of the news, through the lens of social media itself and all the different apps that we're all using every day. But then, over the last few years, really thinking about this, one of the things that I think a lot about is I'm not so sure this is also good for our kids. No, not only am I not sure about it, it's not. It's actually not. And there's a couple of things I'm super worried about right now that I'm trying to counter in my work. And one of the ways I'm countering it is by saying, let's actually be media literate, not just for our kids, but for ourselves. Like, what do we even mean by that? And then the second thing is like actually taking a stand to say, let's actually turn off the screens. Like, let's just not do so much with the screens. So, let me put it out there. I might've mentioned this last time we were together, but Sweden has just made a nationwide decision to remove all screen-based learning from their schools. The whole country has decided to do it because they did the research and they felt like this is not good for our kids. Like, as soon as this all started to happen, our teachers were buying a lot of technology, or not, the superintendents making these big investments. As soon as we saw kids, especially obviously during COVID, being on screens a lot, and the entire country just put the brakes on. They just said, you know what? We don't have to do it like that. We don't have to do that. So one of my things that has been keeping me up at night is, could we be more powerful about this? Could we actually speak more to that? So that's kind of the spiciness for me, is like, how could we turn that down? So that's like one thing. And then the second thing is, being that probably the cat's out of the bag and we've got a lot of screens happening and we've got a lot of kids looking at a lot of stuff, how can we make them as smart as possible? How can we empower us and them, us as parents, grandparents, and teachers, for sure, to be not just like turn off your phone, but more, could we be smarter about how we look at everything? Could we use this as an opportunity to be really critical thinkers? Like, I remember my daughter, when she was little, we were watching TV and she said, Mommy, like, why is it that it's all those commercials about cleaning the kitchen or cleaning detergents always have only women are doing the cleaning? But she noticed that. She was like 6 years old, and I really appreciated that she's doing that. Like, I was very proud of her for that. I said, you noticed that all on your own? That's kind of amazing. Because even for me, like, as her mom, I just sort of I was like, that's just how it is. Right. And even to this day, when you look at commercials for anything related to household chores, it's still 98% women doing that work. And so think of all the messages that are going into us. And what she was doing right then was a kind of a form of media literacy. It was like, I'm going to read the world. I'm not just going to sit here and let it all just come in. So I think there's like two parts of me. One is, I'll do what we have to do with what we have. And the other is like, please, can't we be like Sweden?
No, so I love this approach, and we're going to dive deeper into this. You highlighted two specific areas that I really hope we have time to talk about. The first being this idea of how do we more strategically put the screens away. And I think it's so fascinating about Sweden. I don't think we discussed that. That's really, really interesting. So I kind of want to dive into some of the strategy that we can give our listeners. Maybe you don't feel like you have as much power as a teacher to do that today, but maybe when you get home with your family or when you are monitoring your own work, you can make some good choices in that space. We'll talk about that.
Yep.
The other thing I think is so beautiful to talk about is some of this auditing that we can teach our students to do. Because when I think of this work that we're focusing on this week, I don't think of, and I should, but I don't think of auditing commercials and looking at the messages that were being sent. I think commonly, like yesterday's episode, I think of the news, fake news, whatever, but really doing an audit in all things, I think is a really beautiful approach and something we can encourage ourselves and our families and our children to be able to do. So let's start first with this tactical approach of screens can be really challenging to put away. Are there ways or little small strategies we can begin implementing that allow us to put screens away maybe a little bit more than we're doing right now? What comes to mind for you, Pam?
Well, I have one that, people might appreciate, because I've been thinking a lot about that too, from my own perspective, because something like, I know some of the cities, like I live in New York City, and the chancellor and team are talking a bit about, banning cell phones from schools, like California is doing.
Yep.
And one thing that really got me thinking was, yes, we can do that for our kids and teenagers, but what are we doing as adults? Like, what can we do to model better? So I thought about that for myself, and I thought this summer, and it's something I can, just say, no matter when, people are listening to this. So it could be the fall, whenever it is. But I would say what I decided to do is I said to myself, this summer, I'm only going to read print books. I'm not going to read on my Kindle. I'm not going to read on my phone like the way I've been doing for the past years. And I went to Barnes and Noble. I bought a bunch of books. I went to the library, got out like one of the books that like you could only take out for 2 weeks just to force myself to like not forget that I had it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I did that. And then I like sort of made my stack and I posted it on social media. So you guys can see it. If you want to find me on social media, I put it on Facebook and Twitter. Facebook and Instagram. And I put it there and I said, this is what I'm reading this summer and this is how I'm reading it. And I'm thinking like when I go back to talk to my students, I'm going to tell them that, like, how did it go? Like, what did it feel like? Did it feel different? Like, does my brain feel different? Because I'm already halfway into the second book and I'm telling you, it feels different. Mm-hmm. I'm not as distracted. Like, I'm almost forgot how to read like this. Like, I'm not so distracted. I don't like when I'm reading on my Kindle, I start like if something interesting, let's say I'm reading and it's about Italy, like I'll stop and I'll go like Google search, where can Jim and I go on our trip to Italy? You know what I mean? Like I start, and when you're reading in a print book, you just don't do that, like you're just not doing it. And so I guess what I would say to us teachers, as educators is like, what's one challenge you can give yourself? Maybe it's like no cell phone Saturdays, or even just Saturday morning if you can't bear to have the whole day without it. Like, what are 3 hours? Maybe you and the whole family can just say that. And then coming back to say to your students, I felt different, or it just made me feel like this. Can we all try that? So instead of it being like, what I don't love about these cell phone bans is I feel like it is all on the students. It's like not on us,
Yeah.
And like, what more can we do that feels not so negative, but like almost like a really cool, there was something else I read. I think it was in Amsterdam. See, it's all the Scandinavian. I don't remember where it was. It was not here, but it was somewhere where they have these cafes now that you cannot have a phone or computer on when you go into. And like everyone's just sort of sitting around talking to each other, reading. They look completely like they're having a blast, So we could say that to our students also. Like, what can you imagine? Like, could we have like, no technology Wednesdays where we just come back the next morning and tell me, what did you do?
Yeah.
Type of thing.
I think there's so many beautiful moments here. I'm eager to see how all of you listening are able to reflect on this conversation. Obviously, some of you might be watching on YouTube, but for those of you listening on Teach Better Talk podcasts can be a great way. Using audio rather than the visual can be a beautiful way to do a number of things. Rather than washing the dishes with the TV on, wash the dishes and throw that football game on your, on your speaker and, turn the screen off, or, throw up your favorite podcast and listen to that, or an audiobook while you're doing different things around the house. So there's so many beautiful takeaways here, Pam. I really appreciate it. And forming it as a challenge for adults to be really strong models for students, I think is a beautiful way to start approaching this. The other thing I really like, Pam, is your focus on accountability, taking that picture and saying, this is what I'm reading, even though there's some comedy to like making a photo and posting that, whatever. I love it. I love it. But I love
it. That's the conundrum. Yeah. I mean, you're totally 100% right. And I feel like I got so much positive response from that posting. People saying like, tell me what you think of the books, and like, I'm going to do it too. And, I read that one and that was amazing. And I thought, if I hadn't done that actual stack and like this, yes, we are in virtual communities together, like no matter what we say. And of course, there's something I absolutely completely love about that, which is why I don't want to turn us off completely, but I think that intentionality around it is its own form of media literacy.
100%. That's what I couldn't agree more, that it's the intentionality with the engagement and then the choice to step away when appropriate. And that's a great skill. The other thing I do want to make sure we highlight is the second element of this conversation that we were looking at, which is being able to use our media literacy skills in day-to-day efforts just as intentionally as in our intentional efforts within maybe a lesson plan or assignment. I really valued your example of the commercial and questioning how that is exposure. I think that this is a moment where any teacher can actually choose to challenge themselves to incorporate this in moving forward, no matter what they're teaching, to be able to occasionally, throw into some class discussion. Is there any biases? Are there any issues with what we're experiencing? Anything that we can see, and value that discussion? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with you so much. And I actually think, because it makes me, there's so much to talk about with that, because, as an adult, like, teacher or not teacher, just the way the news is and how polarizing it is for us and how it's separating all of us. I actually have been talking a lot about this idea of empathy building through the work that I do, and the curriculum that I'm writing right now, which is a writing curriculum, is like front forward empathy. Like, how are we building, as opposed to like building worlds where there's so many, everyone is like prevented from hearing each other's voices because this algorithms are saying you're only going to hear that and you're only going to hear this, and some of this might not even be true. But I think the thing is about what I like too about thinking back about Charlotte looking at the news, looking at the commercial, the way she was looking at it, is I think we can do that with our students. Like, everything we do around media literacy doesn't have to be like the news itself, but it's almost like practicing that muscle in your mind. It's like media literacy, or an empathetic muscle that you're building in terms of, listening to other people's stories. But even this is, I know people love this show, so take this with a grain of salt, but I think it's a good example. Like Bluey, for example, is a very popular show. Like, I've watched 1 million episodes of it, but I read this really great article, I think it was in the Atlantic, about this woman wrote, and she said, okay, I love the show, but why is the dad, it's really funny actually, she says, why is the dad, like, he's the stay-at-home dad, he always gets to be at home, but why is he only ever just playing with his kids? Like, when we see mothers in books, they're always like cooking, doing the dishes, while even like, blueberries for Sal, the mother's out there foraging for the blueberries while the baby bear is with her. But meanwhile, in Bluey, the father's always this goofy, he's kind of like a child father, and he's always having like hilarious yet weird things happen. And I laughed so hard when I read that. But that's critical. That's media literacy right there. She's looking with a lens that makes you really think, because there was something I always thought, is this, I don't know, like sometimes the humor is a little too satirical for my taste for young children, but I also admire the show because there's a lot of humanity in it. So when she wrote that, I thought, that is so awesome that she's doing that. And I think that we can do that with books too. Like, our media literacy can be through picture books also. Like, let's talk about this page. Do you think this is representing a story that we all want to read? Is there anything missing that we'd like to add? Do we feel like this author is, giving us a good sense of what, or let's say it's a nonfiction book and it's a picture book. Is there more we want to learn? Are there other authors we want to visit? So that's all media literacy too. Even if we're not looking at a screen, we're teaching them how to think critically. Like, when Gus said, I like this book, that's media literacy. Like, he just is looking at those pictures and something is compelling to him. And to me, it's like, the very beginning of media literacy is, do you like it? Do you not like it? Is something making you feel uncomfortable? And if it is, what is that? What is that? Let's unpack that.
We could talk on this forever. Pam, you are one of my favorite people to have conversations with. I take over. I'm not a host during the show when we talk. I'm just this like hungry, eager learner to learn from you. I so appreciate it. We are going to have to transition here into our last segment, talking about some major takeaways. And then, of course, the multiple ways that you can connect with Pam Allyn. Stick with us. Major takeaways from this episode. They are going to be in abundance. And we also want to make sure you're able to connect with the one and only Pam Allyn and her incredible team doing incredible work, not only for educators, but alongside educators. So that will be coming up here next. Pam, before we get to our contact information, I would love to have you share a takeaway from this episode that you really hope educators listening, whether they're classroom teachers, have leadership roles, family members, anything in between can think about after this episode ends.
Well, I think I would say that my takeaway is see your students as teachers of us. That I think asking them your wonderings, what motivates you? What are you looking when you look at something online? What are you thinking about? What are you wondering about? What do you want to push back on? Where those questions are really open-ended so that you yourself can be impacted by your students. You can allow yourself to kind of take a deep breath. You don't have to do all the heavy lifting. You've got a lot of really wonderful voices in that room. So I think that's one. And then the second is letting yourself, which I know your audience already does so much of, but letting us be inspired by our students. So those quotes they write or those sayings they create or the commentary that they have when they're watching, trying to get outside the box of the way we're looking and thinking about screen life versus print-based life, is letting them almost lead the way, saying to them, I'm not sure how to deal with this. I'm not sure how to deal with, all that's going swirling around us with all the screens on. Like, can you help me? Because I'd like your help on that. To me, that's the takeaway, is giving them that agency and letting them lead us.
Friends, we always have rich episodes, but this episode definitely had some memorable moments. We want to make sure that if you were multitasking during the episode, you go back and listen to everything from Pam's incredible work that she's doing and has done in her career. We had an incredible conversation on motivation, ideas on how to decorate your classroom, get to know your students, get to know your staff, and everything in between. And then, of course, the risk factors, diving into literacy and what we can actually do to be active in this process. Pam, I would love to have you share a little bit about how our community can stay connected to you, because I truly hope this is not the first or the last time that our community gets to engage with your team.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, so easiest is my name, Pam Allyn, Allyn, and my website is pamallyn.com. So that's always the easiest place to find me. And then deweycommunity.com, which is spelled DEWEY, community.com, is a place where we're incubating a lot of ideas. We make programs, and we are very invitational for teachers who might be listening today to drop by and say, I have an idea, or I'd love to see your stuff before it even goes out into the world. We're always very, very, very open and interested in what your community is thinking about. And then, of course, I am on social media, ambivalently, but loving it at the same time. So you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, X, and LinkedIn. And I'm always just happy to have a conversation or just to see you all back here again. And I love your community. I love what you're doing. I think it's amazing. And I think it's very life affirming and very nourishing that you are helping the education community feel connected to each other.
We have an incredible family here in the Teach Better community. And Pam, we're thrilled that you're a part of it. If you got this far in the episode, we hope you enjoyed it. And we also hope that you take a second to rate and review the pod. And also, of course, subscribe over on YouTube if you enjoy watching the show as well. We hope you have an incredible day. And Pam, thank you again for joining. This conversation was absolutely amazing.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks, everybody.